I just got back from conducting 3 weeks of very intensive, very important research down in Australia and New Zealand.
Here, cookies and cream.
While we were away, the guys cut a hole in the roof. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. You've seen what our brew house looks like and what it does, and today we're showing you a big expansion to that brew house. A brew house upgrade like this gets me super excited because not only will we have our software engineers on site to help us refine our software, but we have an army of process pipe welders down below who are going to take our running list of upgrades that we've been planning for 3 years, these small little tweaks that when put together amount in massive leaps of quality upgrades, not only in efficiency, but quality of our beer. It's hard for me to explain, but if you can imagine being a home brewer in the garage and just keeping a list of three years long and a mile long of upgrades that you would like to see happen, and then they happen all at once, it's gonna be a beautiful thing. All right, so this is quite the project. We added a new wort kettle and lauter tun. To do that, we had to plumb all the drainage down below, of course set the rebar and pour the floor. We had to climb up on the roof and pull the air conditioning unit down, and then the welders had to come inside, weld additional supports on the ceiling before cutting that ceiling out and lifting it off with a crane, setting it down in the parking lot. From there, we picked up the new wort kettle, brought it in through the roof while we were open, mind you, and dropped it down and into its final resting place where it now resides. I want to talk a little bit about tank occupation times. Tank occupation times are super relevant in production brew houses because it lets you find bottlenecks and inefficiencies. And in any brew house, naturally, the lauter tun is a bottleneck. The reason for that is that the mash mixer, I'm going to use very round values, even though they're not true values necessarily. Basically, the occupation time of the mash mixer is an hour. The occupation time of the lauter tun and the wort kettle are 2 hours. So in order to make this not a bottleneck in a brew house that has values of 1, 1, 1, and 1, is to add a second lauter tun and a second wort kettle. Let me try to explain what I mean. Let's imagine vessel number 1, the mash mixer. Something is going on in that vessel for 60 minutes. Once that's complete, that tank is considered no longer occupied. Now you have your batch into this kettle, and it sits there, the lauter tun, for 2 hours. As soon as you begin to lauter and run off, so to speak, to transfer that sweet wort into the wort kettle, this tank is technically considered occupied. So from the second that it gets a drop of liquid in the bottom of it, until the second that the last drop is transferred into the whirlpool, this tank is occupied. Now, if you imagine that process happening, a batch that's in the lauter tun being lautered into the wort kettle, you can't mash in another batch because you have a bottleneck. In comes the second lauter tun. Now, if you imagine a brew day, you mash in a batch, you have your sack rest, you transfer into the lauter tun. This vessel would normally sit empty because you can't mash in another one behind it because it would have nowhere to go. So what happens here is the batch that gets transferred into this lauter tun is running off into this wort kettle, and then we're able to almost immediately mash another batch into this mash mixer and transfer into the second lauter tun. Now you might be asking yourself, if you have wort running from that lauter tun into the wort kettle, where does the wort go that you transfer into this lauter tun? And the answer is it goes into a brand new second wort kettle. And that's what this guy is right here. So now we have a brewing day where we've mirrored equipment that we've worked so hard to refine and source and adjust and physically modify to suit our brewing needs, except the throughput of the brew house is now essentially double. So not only does that allow us to scale if necessary, but once again, it relieves the pressure of stress of having to turn the brew house 24 hours a day, 5 days a week, basically without fault. And it also frees up our mash mixer to make more bourbon, to make more white whiskey, to make more vodka, to make more gin. So there are no longer any bottlenecks. And that in brewing is a beautiful thing, because not only does it create beautiful efficiencies, but it frees up headspace for the more important things like hop selection, recipe design, yeast management, sensory analysis, and so much more. All these principles are key to who we are and key to what we do, and that's what this expansion is all about. All right, kind of nerding out a little bit on this one, forgive me, but this is one thing that I think, for me, I'm proud of, and I think conveys the treehouse mentality to the extreme. Michael, if we peek over here at this lauter tun, we'll notice, and I apologize for the mess. This expansion is going to fix this mess. We're brewing white whiskey right now, and the reason we make a mess is because we physically have to dump bags into the mash mixer, and with this expansion, we won't have to do that anymore. So we apologize for the mess, but we'll thank you with bottles of white whiskey for the 4th of July. Anyway, this lauter tun, if you look, it doesn't have a hydrating valve. There's no valve coming out of the side of this kettle. It's super clean, super elegant, allows us to transfer our mash directly in. This guy over here lets us do a direct mash and to utilize the mash mixer as a combi mash vessel and lauter tun if we choose. Why did we do this? Well, not only do we have a wet mill, but now we'll also have a dry mill. We have determined through extensive trial and error and through a lot of lifting of 55-pound grain bags and hand dumping into the mash mixer and directly into the lauter tun that having both options for certain beers is essential. This has come at extraordinary cost, and I just feel like it's important to share that in terms of how crazy we are about brewing the very best beer possible, regardless of circumstances. All right, so real quick for the brew nerds out there, and also maybe some process pipe nerds that might be watching, got some friends from Zajac right here who are working on the process pipe underneath these vessels, and I want to talk a little bit about how that's different from the way that we first constructed the brew house and what we've changed about this upgrade. Let's take a look. So it's obviously, once again, it's certainly a mess down here, but these guys are running a tight ship. Everything looks awesome. They're working on welding some process pipe here underneath these tanks. What's different about the tanks that came in through the roof is that for weight requirements and for shipping requirements and also expedition, these tanks weren't outfitted at the factory by GEA. We're outfitting these tanks here in the field. So the mash mixer beneath that you can see behind me came directly from the factory, essentially prefab, and then we only had to do the interconnecting piping. What we're doing is we're outfitting these tanks in the field. That's great for a couple of reasons. One, because they're able to make it designed in a more elegant fashion, and two, because if we need to make changes in the field based on process presumptions and other considerations that we learned throughout the first brew house installation, we can do that. So this is a very, very cool process. These guys have about 4 weeks down here working on this before we dive into software engineering and commissioning. There's just a few more things over here on the other side of the lauter tun. Just, again, things you may or may not have seen in the past. I just think visually it's very cool for you guys to see. Coming down here, every time I look at it, I'm like, whoa, this stuff is super cool. Underneath the lauter tun, we have this big gear drive that runs the rakes. And then this right here is actually the spent grain outlet. So the days of hand shoveling grain, which we have certainly done in the past, are long behind us, fortunately. And this guy here talks to the same spent grain silo as the original lauter tun. And we'll just have, instead of a batch every 4 hours going in there, we'll have a batch every 2. So we'll be sending a full truckload of grain out about every 12 hours, which is mind-blowing stuff. And then the last thing that I want to point out is that, I guess, Michael, if you pop over here, the wort kettle will run through the same heat exchanger and through the same aeration skid as we currently have. So these boys doing the process piping right now are working on connecting these things in. So we have very, very similar attributes to what we have now. We can jump right into brewing the way that we're accustomed to with more speed and more efficiency. All right, so last thing that we wanted to talk about is the PLC that will control the new brew house. The PLC is not even physically here yet, and you may be unfamiliar with what a PLC is, but essentially it's an electronic controller that receives signals from valves like this on the brew house and then translates them into a graphical user interface, a GUI, on a workstation that we can manipulate to control variables during the brew. And as part of the commissioning process, I'm gonna put this down. I feel kind of weird, like, hey, how's it look? During the commissioning process, we have our friend Ramon Marmolejo from Monterrey, Mexico, who's gonna come visit us once again and help us commission this brew house. But long story short, we get super excited when Ramon comes out because he can manipulate and basically software engineer anything we need to happen on that new brew house expansion exactly to our liking. So Ramon's gonna come on out and help us out. We're gonna get the band back together again. And we're gonna make beer with more efficiency, creativity, and finesse than we ever have. All right, gang, so that's the brew house upgrade overview. Team here killed it while we were away. Flew tanks through the roof, did all this crazy stuff, and they've done a hell of a job doing it. Put a lot of thought and consideration into this, not only to make things easier for us here, but to make our beer ultimately better. Expanding your brew house and creating efficiencies does not mean making your beer worse. It means giving you more time to think about things and ultimately more time to have that hands-on approach. If you're not already a subscriber, we encourage you to do so. Thanks for watching. Be good to each other.